Good evening. My name is Eric Hodson. I work with the Arizona region of USA Volleyball, and tonight we're offering a very special conversation about race and coaching in not only our region and our sport, but in sport in general. We have 5 amazing panelists that are going to talk about the subject for the next 90 minutes, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Penny, why don't you go ahead and start?
Hi, my name is Penny Lucas White. I'm the head women's volleyball coach at Alabama State University. I started my career as a head coach at the University of Memphis, where I spent 5 years there. I spent 15 years, 14 seasons at the United States Air Force Academy. I'll be entering my 10th season this upcoming fall, where I've won the last 6 out of 7 championships. Thank you.
Amber?
Hey, so I'm Amber Cannady. I'm the assistant at Seattle University. I started my career at my alma mater at UNH, where I worked for 2 years. I then left to play overseas, came back, and coached at Columbia for the last 2 seasons as well. This is my first season with Seattle, luckily at the start of the pandemic, but either way, we're super excited.
Terry, you want to go ahead?
Hi, my name's Terri Spann with Arizona Storm Elite Volleyball Club. I am in my 3rd season as the owner of the club, but the club's been around for 14 years. I originally moved to Arizona when I came out here to play at Arizona State University. I coached at Texas Tech and my alma mater, ASU. Just back coaching club, living the best of my life, involved in a lot of youth sports and getting them ready to play at the next level collegiately. So it's been awesome.
Charita?
Hi, I'm Charita Stubbs. I'm the assistant coach at the University of Arizona. I played here from 1990 to 1994. I started coaching after a year overseas in France and worked here for about 10 years. Left, went to NC State where I served as the head coach for 4 seasons. After that, got out of it completely, regrouped, and then came back to the University of Arizona under Dave Rubio.
How long have you been there with Dave?
Total? Oh, well, I think about 18 years now. Dave's biggest success has come with me around.
He'll be happy to hear
that. Say that, Rita.
Yeah. And Ray, go ahead, tell us about you.
Hi, my name is Ray Lewis. I'm the head coach at Benedictine University Mesa, or NAI men's program in Mesa, Arizona. We made it to back-to-back national championships, winning in 2019. This is my 5th year as a head coach this upcoming year. And yeah, I kind of moved my way up from high school, and then I did a little bit of JUCO assistant coaching and assisting at the NAI level, and then I took over the program 5 years ago now.
That's great. Thank you guys all for being here. Ray, I want to start with you. Last week, one of the volleyball entities that you work with put together a scholarship package, and in the press release was a story that you had told about your journey as a young Black coach coming up through the ranks. Can you talk about that story a little bit and flesh it out for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think my story is just, I talked a lot about how intimidating it can be to be, you know, a minority in the sport of volleyball, especially an African-American male. There's a very, very small group of us. In men's volleyball, I think at the D1 level, there's probably 2 to 3 African-American coaches in general. And so I talked a lot about just that experience and being the only African-American kid on my high school team, then being one of 2 in my college program, and then entering the coaching ranks and being one of the only minority voices. And some of those experiences that I've had, I coached at an inner city high school for about 5 years. So we've experienced racism firsthand. We've had, you know, kids called the N-word on the court and told that volleyball is not their sport, you know. And I've seen it as a coach. You know, I've heard a lot of things about how my kids weren't talented at volleyball. They were just Black kids that were athletic. And so that was their only advantage they had in the sport. And so I just shared a lot about that and how it can sometimes be intimidating when you watch, you know, especially men's volleyball on TV, but women's as well. And you don't see a lot of coaches with, you know, my skin tone coaching at the highest level. So sometimes I think for young coaches, it can be intimidating, and it makes you say, can I reach that if not many others have that look like me?
So I want to open up to all you guys and let's talk about this a little bit. One of the things he mentioned is that there wasn't a whole lot of role models for him as far as coaches with color go as he was coming up. How do we address this and how do we fix it? Anybody can jump in.
I mean, honestly, I'll jump in as one of the younger ones. No shade. Honestly, Penny, when I was younger, I looked up to you because you were one of the few Black female coaches that I did see, and more specifically Black female. I know that Ray did know Black male, but like ultimately, when you look at the coaching staff that most universities have, it's male. You don't really have as many successful females that are head coaches. You look at Mary Wise, who's the white female that's done extremely successful, but you also look at yourself, who's done the same. So when you have like maybe 2 or 3 people to look to in like your coaching career and like what your path could be in like moving up in the structure, because we all know that it's a learning curve for all of us when you're sitting there and you have your first coaching experience to where you want to be, and how do you map that out versus like the conferences you jump to, the teams that you jump to, the head coaches that you work under. And I mean, ultimately, it's just focusing on the 1 or 2 that you do have, wishing there were more, but understanding that you're building more through like continuing in this profession. Because ultimately, like my goal is the same, to be a strong female leader for like younger kids. And as far as like the informational process, being welcomed into the Minority Coaches Association or committee was awesome. Like I had never, honestly, this was my first year, even though this is my 6th year coaching, that I really joined it. And like seeing the camaraderie and the helpfulness and like understanding or navigating like these new spaces that we're all experiencing was amazing. But they're right. You're in a space that you don't traditionally see yourself, and it's just about making a way.
And I think it has everything to do with opportunity. And I think that's unfortunate because when I was coming up after playing for the United States, playing in Italy, playing in Germany, it's not that we're not qualified, it's how we are viewed. So you have this systemic way of us being viewed when we do go and apply for those jobs. But when we do get into those jobs, I think what we've done very well over the years is make sure that we create a space for young African-American coaches such as yourself, that you have a soft place to fall and that you have a place to bend. Unfortunately, our voices aren't always heard, but in every Final Four and in every Olympics, that court is filled with African-American women. And it's not because they're athletic, it's because they're very skilled. They're very good at what they do. And so not to be given the opportunity to coach after that, and I say opportunity, unfortunately, I know after I played professionally, they only wanted to bring us on the staff so we could be a liaison for the African-American females that was on the team. We were their place to fall. Doesn't mean we weren't qualified. And I think now if you look, yes, we do have a lot of we have a number of African-American coaches. Unfortunately, I still don't understand why our sport is still managed majority by white men. So at the same time, I will stand on the word, because every time I'm on the court with women like you and brothers like you, you know what you're talking about. You're totally qualified. I could see a kid completely evolve after you have spent time with them.
Rita, you were a head coach and an assistant coach. You've kind of seen both the windows. Can you talk about your experiences as well?
Well, part of it is I came into coaching by mistake. It wasn't anything that I planned to do. I didn't envision myself doing it because I didn't see any Black women coaches out there. You know, everyone we played against in the conference was a male or a white female, so it wasn't something that I aspired to do, but Dave saw in me something that said that I can do it. And initially I turned him down, and then a year later I came back and he asked me to do it. And so I had no idea what I was doing, because as a player I was a nightmare. I wasn't someone that I would want to coach by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm grateful that he took a chance on me. And so he took me under his wing. And I remember Dave always telling me that in order for you to be successful, you need to associate yourself with people that were going someplace. And I didn't really know what that meant, because everyone I saw didn't look like me. So I wasn't sure if I could go someplace with it in terms of having a visual ahead of me, which is why when Barack Obama became president, he gave everyone an opportunity to say, now I can possibly see myself in that position. So as a coach, that's what I saw. But I remember when I first got the job, it was a former teammate of mine, Trina Smith. She was an assistant at South Carolina, and she set me at the table with everyone and said, these are the people you need to know. So immediately she took me under her wing. And then Dietrich Collins was there, and we've been friends ever since 1996, December 1996, I remember it. And so she kind of guided me along and introduced me to Penny. And little story, Penny doesn't even realize this, I don't think, that when I went to France, it was because of the connection Penny gave. So we actually spoke, Penny, in 1995, and you gave me the number to get myself to France. So it's just little things like that. And so when I got the head job at NC State, everyone said I was qualified, but I didn't know that I was qualified. So I didn't know enough in myself about it. Then I got there, and I'll be honest, I was a total mess up, because I was too prideful to say I needed help. I was too strong-willed to say that I didn't know what I was doing. So I didn't allow anyone in, even though there was a ton of resources out there. There's a ton of individuals that would help, but it took me to get away from what I only knew to realize what I didn't know so that I'm better. So coming back around this time, I don't worry about the little things. I don't limit myself to a certain group of individuals. And I think that that has made me better as a person, whereas I'm good for everyone now versus a group that look just like me. But I do know that had it not been for Trina sitting me at that table with the people, and had it not been for Dave giving me that tidbit of information to get out and get to know people, I don't think that I would have survived this long in the game, because it just wasn't enough. And the things that you have to deal with, and my time at NC State, it was definitely interesting. Growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, I lived a certain way. So I grew up in the inner city. My school was 99% Black, and that's just the way it was. We had white teachers, yes. And then I went to Arizona, came to Arizona, where no one looked like me other than one other teammate. And she took me under her wing and taught me to do some crazy stuff. Terri can tell you those stories. That was Trina too. And then I evolved as a person. So I got the happy medium between the two. And I think that's what's important, is for us to understand that I was headed down one path because of how I was raised, but yet I was exposed to something else. And not to say how I was raised was necessarily bad. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm not going to say that it was bad. But it made me stronger and able to help navigate the way for what's next, which we will get to.
So, and Terri, you came up, and you and I have had this conversation as a biracial woman in Long Beach, and you've worn so many different hats as a player and a coach, college coach, high school coach, club director. So again, where were your role models, or did you have any? And if not,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in downtown Long Beach, and I went to a small Catholic school. And the reason why I went to the school I went to, St. Anthony's, was because my mom didn't want me to be affiliated with any gangs or have any issues or anything like that. But when I started at this school, that's kind of when I started playing volleyball, like at 14, and I played for a club by the name of Ichiban, and my coach was Roger Goodwin. And I played with mostly Polynesians or African Americans. The minority was actually Caucasian. So very rarely did we have any white girls on our team. And my coach, it's not that he necessarily recruited only minorities or whatever, but he really went above and beyond to make sure that there was a opportunity for these minorities to get involved in this sport and to play. I'll never forget, Eric, I came home, I think my sophomore year of college, and there was an envelope on the kitchen table, and I asked my mom why she was sending a letter to my coach, and she goes, "I'm still paying for your club fees." And I go, "What do you mean you're still paying?" And she goes, "Roger was so good to me all these years as a single parent, helping you and your sister play club volleyball, that he just put you on scholarship, but it's my duty to pay him back." And she had still been paying him back. And I think it was like $150 check, which is like, like nothing in comparison to what people are paying now. But Roger was really good about giving back to the kids in the inner city. And I'm pretty positive he pretty much worked for free all these years of coaching me. And so I'll be honest with you, the first time I came to Arizona State was when I met a married couple that had been married for a long time. Like my teammates, I was introduced to a whole nother world when I became a freshman at ASU. I'd never been around married couples. always been single parents. It's always been minorities. I never really saw volleyball as predominantly a white sport until I got to college, just because I just never really paid attention to it. And we were just this really athletic club team that we were pretty dang good because we were just all athletes, and we had played for this coach that just trained the heck out of us for so many years. And when we all went off to college, went our separate ways and everything, I think that's when I kind of experienced different things. And I don't know, my whole world opened up a little bit, but it's been interesting to look back. You know, just recently, so many things have just kind of come up recently in conversations of my experience as a athlete in high school, in club and college, and just being so involved in youth sports and club sports and high school sports now. It's so interesting because being biracial back then was a minority, you know. And I mean, I was the only biracial kid in my elementary school, and then in high school, I mean, I've been called everything under the sun. I was teased all the time, and you know, I wasn't quite dark enough, you know, or accepted sometimes in the Black community, but then, you know, I was still considered Black in the white community. And so there was always that confusion as a biracial. And, you know, people would always ask me, which side do you go with? And you know, my mom raised me to educate me on both sides, and it was very important to her. So I've always been very vocal about being biracial and the struggles I had growing up, but I feel like it helped me be the strong, independent, confident woman I am today. So yeah.
And I need to make this really clear. Terry's talking about Arizona State University, ASU, and Penny, of course, coaches at Alabama State University, not ASU. So we need to make sure I don't want any trouble. So, question. So, Ray, I want to come back to you. So, again, I want this to be a kind of a webinar of talking about how to solve problems. So, you've all kind of talked about these issues of not having role models. How do we, as not only as a sport, but as white coaches and Black coaches and together, how do we combat this? How do we fix this? Ray, let's start with you.
Well, I think on the men's side of the game, and I can really only speak to the men's side at this point, I think we have to start to diversify. If you look at men's volleyball at the highest level, there are no Black athletes in the United States. I shouldn't say no, but there's very few that you see make it to the national team gym. So that's, I think, the first issue we have to address is, I think John Sparrow's doing an incredible job with his movement. He started it at a lot of HBCUs, but the issue they're running into is now they don't have qualified coaches, and there's not a pool of those athletes to recruit from. So I think we have to find kids in those underserved communities and give them opportunities, whether it's creating clubs that are affordable, or, you know, the GMS coaching scholarship program was a great opportunity to help develop young coaches that may not have the means otherwise. So I think it's a lot of us going out into underserved communities and giving those kids opportunities to play volleyball, because the reality is it's not a sport that's cheap to play, you know, with club, and there's a lot of equipment that goes into it, where basketball, football, you can just go pick up a ball and play outside. And then on the men's side of the game, it's underfunded. So we don't have scholarship opportunities for men to play at the collegiate level, let alone minority men. And so I think as we continue to grow both at the club level and the youth level, and then also find ways to fund the game, I think we can start to diversify men's volleyball.
Penny, you brought up earlier opportunities. How do we create more opportunities for, you know, players to go into coaching? People of color. How do we get them into coaching?
I think that's an excellent question, and that's what I think that's where the problem lies, is that after they're done playing, no one's officiating at the club level. We still have a lot of old people officiating, and we have to get them to a place where they are so in love with the sport that they want to get back to the sport. I think there are many opportunities. I know that we do a lot of community service with my program to make sure that we immerse them in the community, as well as be involved with the local club programs here in our city. But it's important that we figure out a way how to get them to where they give back to the sport that actually open doors for them. And I wasn't able to tell my story a little bit, Eric. I was a basketball player, so I'm older than everybody on this panel. Let me just put that out there right now. But we didn't have club volleyball when I came up. I'm 58. What is that? We didn't know what that was, but I was a basketball player. Grew up with 5 brothers. So we played basketball. There was a goal in every schoolyard. but there's no volleyball nets. And so when I went to high school was when they started busing us out of our neighborhoods to create segregation, to bring us all together. So then I go to this all-white school that doesn't have a basketball team. What am I supposed to do? Thank God for my high school coach who really convinced me to go out for volleyball. I'm like, I don't know anything about volleyball, but she taught me volleyball and I fell in love with volleyball. And she used to put us all in the back of her Suburban and drive us to all of these little camps. And it was a wonderful experience. Myra Smith at the time is Myra Manser. And to this day, she's still a mentor of mine, but she became an athletic director. She made a point to bring minorities in all the time. She started out in public school, finished her career in private, but always exposed those kids and try and bring kids into the private school, creating scholarships, creating opportunities for kids that were qualified that could be successful in those private school settings and also play volleyball. And she was just a pioneer who opened doors. And I was able to go on and play volleyball at LSU. And I'm like Rita, I didn't plan on coaching. I was working Mary Wise volleyball camp, and a fax came across that there was an opening at the University of Memphis. And Mary Wise said, Penny, I think you'll do well at University of Memphis. I said, I've never been a head coach before. She said, you'll be fine. I'll be right here for you if you need me. And I took the job on site, unseen. But that's what we women do for each other. We open doors for each other. But that's my story. I was a basketball player. And thank God that I had a coach that saw a lot in me. And even when it was time to recruit, she drove me all over the country in the back of her Suburban, because back then, y'all, you tried out for teams. You didn't just, you weren't really recruited. So it's an interesting story how things have evolved. But opportunity, we have to open doors for young women. That looks like.
Can I ask a question next? So what I want to say is, Penny, our story is kind of similar because it was my high school coach who would put us in the tournaments in the suburbs. So when, a lot of people talk about Cleveland now, they're not talking about Cleveland. They're talking about the suburbs of Cleveland. So he would put us in those tournaments and we would get smoked. We were more athletic. We could jump higher, move faster, but we would lose all the time. But he would speak life into us all the time. You guys are going to beat them. You're going to be able to get outside of the city and do more. So he would just constantly put us in that environment. And I remember when the national team came to Cleveland State, he took us down there. And it was the first time I met Kiba Phipps when she was still young playing on the team. And he said, you can do what she can do. Now, I didn't quite get that far, but nonetheless, it was someone as a player that I saw. But that was about the end of it. I was actually better in basketball and track, and I opted to take volleyball. I had one offer, and it was to the University of Arizona. And I took it because it was one school that believed in me that I could do something. I didn't want to play basketball. I really didn't want them touching me, and I didn't want to get big, and I don't like running, so track was going to be out. So I took the volleyball offer and excelled as a result of it. And my coach, like your coach, Penny, my track coach, filled out my application. I didn't know you were supposed to fill out an application for college. And she was the one who took me to the airport when I had to go off to college. She made sure that I was able to go on my visits because I could have gone to Stanford for track. And I remember, and it kind of hurt me a little bit. It was a Black coach there at the time. And when I said that I wouldn't come to Stanford, he cursed me out. And he was like, how dare you not come to Stanford? And I'm just like, but I didn't know. Stanford meant absolutely nothing to me. But he didn't understand where I was coming from and what my mindset was like in that situation. So I say all of that to say is that we have to meet the kids where they are.
Where they are.
Get out there and speak to them on their level and then sprinkle in the knowledge that we have, because if we talk above their head, they're going to feel some kind of way. And we hear that all the time. If you talk too down to them, then they're like, well, why are they treating me like I don't know any better? So when we go out every spring from January to the middle of May, we go to elementary and middle schools. One of the reasons why I don't like the NCAA rules is because we can't go to high schools, but we go to elementary schools and middle schools and the lower economic areas. We'll go there and we'll do free clinics and expose them to it. And I'll go in there and I'll immediately say, my name is Charita. And I'll stand tall to make everyone say, oh, I can do this as well, versus going in being quiet. And then we take our players as well and encourage them to do it, so that then they come to games. We do autographs. I bend over backwards to make sure that the people of color get an opportunity to see that they can be in this position. It is the community service, Eric, that you asked. What do? We go out in the community. We speak to the club. We take time out when we go recruiting to go up to that team that have a whole bunch of people who look like us and give words of advice. Get that phone number of that coach and stay in contact with them, not because you're trying to recruit anybody necessarily, but because you want to give them an opportunity. Because truth be told, going to your school is 1 degree of separation. So it's just because you spread that name to someone else, and just give them the opportunity, because there are a lot of qualified players out there. And then they'll have that passion, that desire to see what was given to them, and hopefully they'll be ready to go into the coaching realm.
Yeah. Amber, you grew up in New York City. Talk about your opportunities and how
So
you got.
honestly, you always get New York City wrong. I grew up in Yonkers. It's close to the Bronx. We basically feel like we're a borough, but we're not. We're not recognized as such. But honestly, it's like they said, like, I'm tall and I'm black and I'm from New York. They made me play basketball. Just like you, Rita, I didn't like to be touched. I wasn't a fan of all the ruffle and scuffle. It wasn't for me. And I didn't get exposed to volleyball really until my junior year of high school. So I was a really late bloomer. And understanding what your coaches do for you in that sport, like in the club section, parents and teammates aren't always forgiving, as we know, like especially when you're new to the sport, when you're physical, but you haven't learned all the nuances. There are a lot of ups and downs in that regard, but it's your coaches that kept you going. And it's your coaches that push you to the next level. Like, I have friends right now who are black males or black females who feel like they don't know if they're educated or qualified. And I'm like, you would be surprised. Just step out, just take the chance, just make an effort. Because I wasn't prepared to coach either. My dad told me, he's like, you should really go into coaching. I'm like, no, Dad, I'm going to start a daycare. I'm going to do all these things. I want to be a teacher. I want to get back in that capacity. And then my coach said it, and I'm like, damn, I really think I should be a coach. And he's like, I just said it. Listen to your parents too. But it's your coach's words that carry a little bit more, because they teach you. And the biggest thing that everyone's been saying is the physicality that we had, the athleticism that we had, but who really sat down and guided us through this game, who made us feel qualified? Because even in the hiring process, like, I've been called a commodity by one of my bosses. They'll be like, you'll be fine. You're a commodity right now. You'll be great. Someone will pick you up. Just like Charita said, people expect us to be on teams to appease their black student athletes, but we are knowledgeable. And it's like re-attaining your power in order to like understand that you can give more to your court. And as far as like the next steps in the next generation and getting more people out there, it is about the exposure. It's those like marginalized communities, whether that be indigenous peoples, whether that be Latinx, whether that be black communities. It's getting out there and giving them an opportunity, because you see them pushed aside so much. And like with club, there comes the fees, like Terri said, and not everybody has scholarships. Not everybody's exposed to that level. So how do we get them? It's great that Charita's starting younger, but it's right. The rules that stop us from going to the marginalized communities at high school, it puts those high school kids at a disadvantage that didn't get us when they were younger. So it's about not necessarily loosening restrictions, because we understand what that can do to student athletes, but like understanding the capacity in which you're working through, so that there can be some similar loopholes, possibly. I understand rulings are very hard to change, and understandably so, but yeah, it's definitely something to consider, because our community needs it. And it's the women and the men that are walking in that gym, like Charita said, like you're back straight, you're standing up tall, and you're giving them this essence that they could be something. And not just something, but something like you, like something bigger than you. Because it's not about making them or like having them follow your path. It's about them preparing them to be better, if that makes sense. Like, you're going to have more opportunities, because I'm not going to pull this ladder up when I'm done. I'm going to leave it there, so that way you don't have to go through the things that I went through. It's going to be easier, so then you can build a ladder for the next person.
Gotcha.
That's what I believe. And
Yeah.
I have to say, Rita, our lives are so parallel. It was the USA came to LSU, and my high school coach took me to see him play, and Flo Hyman signed my cap. Flo Hyman and Rita Crockett. And my high school coach told me, you can play at that level. you can do that. Flo told me, you can do this. You know, those are impressionable moments. And that's what you do when you go to those middle schools and you stand up straight and you talk to those young people of color. It's impressionable. It's lasting.
Yeah. Terri, as a club director, you're trying to get opportunities for your girls not only to play at a higher level, but do you also look at opportunities to maybe officiate, to coach, assistant coach, things like that? Do you talk to your girls about that, and how does that work?
Not so much to officiate or anything like that, but I'm definitely constantly talking about life lessons with my girls and an opportunity to have a voice. A lot of my kids, I mean, if you look at most of my teams, I do tend to have more minorities on my teams, and some people might think that's coincidence, but honestly, as a club director, I get multiple calls all the time where people want their daughters to play for me because they know how I'm always, you know, more one-on-one and kind of I'm a little bit more in tune to issues that might happen, or a lot of times, just like, you know, Penny and Rita said, you want girls to play for, or kids want to play for other girls that maybe dealt with the same type of stuff. A lot of my girls are biracial, ironically, so it's kind of funny. We talk about how to do each other's hair, we talk about the products we use, what we're doing, and all that stuff. So, you know, when I'm coaching, it's not just about skills on the court, but life lessons in life. We talk about stuff like this all the time. With my 16s team, I just had an assignment recently where they had, before June 15th hit, where they were going to be talking to college coaches. I wanted them to get on the phone and talk with a teammate and discuss, and I gave them a list of things to discuss. And one of the issues were to talk about what recently happened with George Floyd. And I don't know that it was a good assignment, because I was kind of bothered that some of the girls chose not to talk about it because they didn't want to. And it was a little bit uncomfortable for me as a coach to enforce it, but I just wanted the girls to kind of discuss it, because it's not just about race, but it's also what's going on in life right now. And, you know, I just think it's so important for these girls to just constantly talk and communicate, because we hide behind our cell phones and text message, and it gets awkward. And there's a lot of things that happen on teams where we kind of just, you know, most people will ignore it, but on my team, not so much. I'm always bringing it to the team huddle. We have moments where we talk on the corner. We'll talk about things that happen in life. And it's not just recent events with George Floyd, it's been multiple events leading up to this. And so I think it's a great opportunity to educate these kids, because here's the deal, Eric. I'm helping these girls go off and play in college. So when we sit down about recruiting and they tell me the schools that they're looking at, I have to remind them, hey, that school's in the South. You're raised on the West, you know, in the West. Like, are you going to be comfortable with that? And those are things that I have to bring to the table, because I don't think it really pops up in their mind. And I just want them to be very aware of how different it is in different regions and in different states. And I think it's important to discuss this stuff and to talk about it. And a lot of these kids don't think about these things sometimes until I bring it up. And I think sometimes they look at me like, why are we talking about this? But I think it's important because they need to know. And for you coaches, the number one thing that a lot of these girls are talking to me about right now is diversity. They want to know that there's going to be a diverse program, or they like that there's an African-American coach on staff and stuff like that, because they want to be able to go to someone if something happens, or talk to someone. And those are the things that my kids in club sports talk to me about, and they feel comfortable talking to me about that. And if they don't, I'm the one bringing it up, because I think it's so important, you know. But it's important to talk and discuss and learn and educate, and that's what I feel like I'm here for. Do I have a tendency to encourage players to look one way over the other? I don't necessarily persuade them, but again, if I take the time to get to know every one of my athletes, and if I know something about them personally or what they're looking for, I'll point certain things out about certain coaches. You mentioned Mary Wise. Mary Wise is always, you know, she's obviously Caucasian, but she has a lot of African-American players within the program. And I think a lot of people have a tendency to look towards programs like Florida because they know that, or, you know, I mean, Rita, you come up all the time with a lot of players in state with Arizona. Obviously, they feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that you're an assistant at or associate at U of A, and they feel more comfortable about that. And I think that's important. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's totally healthy to discuss that.
Last week, Ray and I actually had breakfast with a pretty high level coach who made the statement that you kind of have to get uncomfortable to talk about some of this stuff. You know,
Absolutely.
It's something that you know, coaches in general, we always talk about. We got to get your players uncomfortable to get better. But as coaches, we don't necessarily prescribe by that theory. We sort of kind of sit in our comfort zones a little bit. You know, there's certainly implicit biases out there. Science has proven this over and over and over again. Stanford psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt just wrote the book Biased. It came out a while ago. It's a book about in the criminal justice system, the biases. There's institutional racism. There's all kinds of stereotypes. But this one phrase comes up and it just makes the hair on people's backs stand up. And it's called white privilege. And there's a book called Coaching, Education, Development, and Sport, and one of the chapters is called Understanding and Acting Upon White Privilege in Coaching and Coach Education. And I just want to read this really, really quick to y'all, and then kind of get your thoughts on a little bit. White privilege is a concept used to explain the unearned assets provided to white people because of their dominance in the Western world, which includes creating social and legal structures for their benefit. White privilege is a problem because it hurts people, particularly people of color, physically, psychologically, economically, and socially, and it prevents the realization of democratic ideals such as freedom and justice for all. I think a lot of coaches would take that very, in a sensitive way, take it very hard and think that that's not me. But the fact is, a lot of us are raised in a different environment than you all have been raised. And so I kind of just want to talk about that. How do we address, when you're dealing with white coaches, talking with white coaches, training white coaches, working with white coaches, this probably doesn't come up a lot in conversation, but how do we deal with this and work together better? And Ray, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I think I've dealt with that a lot firsthand, is that if people don't understand your background or how you got to where you're at, they just assume that it was a similar path that they had. And so when I started my club back in Vegas at a boys club, I scholarshiped a ton of kids. Money would come out of my pocket at that point in time to give those young male athletes an opportunity, and it was predominantly minorities. And so when I moved out here and I got into the club world, and you know, we had some kids, especially minority kids, that were coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and I wanted to provide them a scholarship or an opportunity. You know, the people I worked with were like, no, you know, we don't operate that way. We can't. And it was so hard for me to understand, because for me in coaching and as a player, it took a lot for me to get where I'm at today. Even in coaching, I went through the high school ranks, coached high school for a long time. Then I got a junior college assistant job and proved myself as an assistant to get a head coaching job. When I got the head coaching job, I was told I was too young. I wasn't experienced enough. I've heard a lot of that. And I've seen other coaches in the conference get those job opportunities just because they played. Well, I couldn't play club because I couldn't afford it because I had a single mother. And so those are a lot of things that I think we're not looking for guilt. We're not looking for anyone to feel bad about their upbringing. We're just looking for understanding. Like, understand the path that it took me to get where I'm at today, and understand that my approach to the game or my approach to athletes is going to be different because I've had to earn a lot of what I've gotten to this day. You know, I've seen other coaches, even in my conference currently, that got job opportunities because of who they know. They're making bigger salaries. They're at institutions with more resources, and they've done nothing to earn those positions, where I made $8,000 my first year coaching college as a head coach. And so my path and my story is a lot different. So for me, I don't think white privilege is white guilt. And I think that's a lot of times where people get a little sensitive or get uncomfortable. We're not saying feel bad. We're just saying step back and understand, because we may have had a completely different path. And as a minority, I know I've had a much different path in men's volleyball than a lot of other coaches to get where I'm at today. So.
But I think the white privilege is, I'm sorry, but it's a blind spot. And so the problem is they don't know that they don't know. So when you don't know something, you clearly don't know that you don't know it. So you can't understand it. But now is the time that we just asking that you have these uncomfortable conversations to realize that you really don't know. And you can't really generalize us, and you really can't stereotype us, because all of us didn't come up the same way. All of us have different experiences. And if you really, really would just sit back and say, well, would you really have gotten that job if your mother didn't know and came up with the president of that? And but if we were to put the resumes on the desk and you pick the person that's qualified and not slide the person's name on the side because her name is, let me think of what's a typical Black name, guys?
Shonda.
We're just
Something,
Shonda. A typical Black name, because you are uncomfortable with her name or whatever. I know my youngest son, his name is Keith, not Kiefer. I didn't want to put an R on it, so I called him Keith. Doesn't mean he's less qualified. But now is the time that we're asking that you're able, one, to have uncomfortable conversations. Two, it would be amazing if I was to walk up and ask Terri, so Terri, what is it like being raised biracial? And do I say anything that's offensive to you? And if I do, would you correct me? Because some of those jokes aren't funny. We just have always let it slide. And can we, as people of color, speak up? Because you don't know our experiences and not label me as an angry Black woman. So we can talk about all those different labels that have always, that's all it is. It's labels. If we can strip labels from everything that you see in front of you, guess what? Now you look just like me. Because if you pull the skin down, we all look the same. Our blood, everything looks the same. You scratch me, I bleed, you bleed. The only thing is different is the shed, the melon that's on the outside. But if you stop labeling, let's not label. Can you imagine if we were to go one day without labeling anything or anybody or any conversation? Can you imagine that when you talk or coach a kid, that you see that kid as your child? Because we love our kids unconditionally. But now when you coach, every kid that you coach and deal with, you see your child's face on them. You'll start coaching differently. Everywhere you go and when you speak, you see someone you love. Because no way can you say that you want to love your neighbor, that you can put your knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and have a grimace on your face. No way. Yeah. We need to change hearts. In order to change hearts, we got to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately coming off of what Penny said with like white privilege being a blind spot, like when you do recognize, when you do really deep dive into what systemic like racism is and the levels of which it's achieved, it turns sometimes, and unfortunately, into white fragility. Like, we're not here to make you feel bad about your skin color. You didn't pick it, same way I didn't pick it, but we still love ourselves. Like, there's no way I would trade this for anything else. And ultimately, like, I experienced that when I was sitting in on one of my friends' team conversations, because she asked me to mediate it. And I had girl after girl introducing themselves and saying it so, like, heartbrokenly so, like, hi, my name is Emma, and I'm white. And I'm like, you don't need to introduce yourself like that. I see you the same way you see me. And ultimately, you just have to really do some intrinsic searching into what is your like roadblock. Where does it lie with you? Because I have similar coaches saying, hey, Amber, honestly, like, I don't know what it is with Black Lives Matter, but I have a hard time posting that exact saying. Why? I really deep dive. It's my family being police officers. It's my community supporting this. But why does this have to affect this? It's understanding within yourself what your roadblock is so you can do more research and education on it. Because I fully believe, and I totally agree that it's about helping each other through this discussion and getting uncomfortable, but it's also not the burden of the brutalized to comfort the bystander. And if you're going to come to me for my own like specific experiences, I would love it if you tried to educate yourself a little bit. There's so many authors across so many centuries or decades, like Ida B. Wells, James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, like so many people that have properly described and like illustrated what we go through every day and how that works itself into the workplace. And I'm not saying it falls all on your shoulders, but for you to really get past the fragility and look to action steps, you need to understand what the issues are. Because we've talked about education in our like marginalized communities as far as like making that a step. It's the same thing over here. Whatever you don't know, you need to learn. And if you need help through that process, talk to your Black friends, talk to your marginalized friends, ask them for resources, and then come back with questions. Don't just sit there and only rely off of their lived experience, because that's making people relive trauma. And like, I feel like that's important when you're dealing with like minority children, because you're a mentor for them as a coach. You're guiding them through one of the biggest maturation process like steps in their life. Like, college is a lie. It helps form you and your opinions. So it's important that you guide them while understanding what they're going through.
Terri, when you're dealing with your staff, which obviously I'm sure you have white coaches and Latino coaches and Black coaches on your staff, do you sense anything from the white coaches when we have periods in our country like is happening right now? Do they ask questions?
You know, it's interesting. I was pretty quiet on social media about all of this. I chose not to. I'm not a big social media person. Everyone always says I'm queen of social media because I post everything with club. But, you know, realistically, I post and I'm off. I don't scroll through. I don't know whose birthday it is or whatever. And you know, it's interesting because I sent out a message to all of my coaches and to my 16s players and parents, letting them know where I stood as a club director and owner. And I have zero tolerance. And while I might not be speaking out on social media, I'm very vocal in person, and I let them know exactly where I stand. And I basically said, and if you have issues with it, you can not be a part of my organization. And immediately all of them responded with support. And, you know, I was going to ask the rest of you, it meant a lot to me to receive text messages from everyone, you know, saying, hey, I'm praying for you and your family. How are you doing? I want to learn from you, educate me. And I just have so much respect for those people that reached out to me, and many coaches as well. And it says a lot about them. And I love that they're not acting like they're above that. I love that they're not acting like they're not racist, or they know that they're not, you know, in the wrong in any way. But I love that they want to learn. I love that they reached out. I love that they asked questions and allowed me to educate them. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. A common question for me was, you know, as a biracial person, do you experience the same thing? Absolutely, I do. And you know, I'm married to an African American. I'm raising 3 children, and we've all experienced stuff. You know, I had to listen to my daughter say that, you know, some people thought she wasn't in support by not going to downtown Denver. And I'm like, yeah, you don't need to protest or be a part of any riots or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with you having a vocal voice and just educating people, you know. And I think we approach things differently. And I do my best to talk to people, educate, and have conversations, opposed to, you know, getting angry or anything like that, especially in our field. You know, we're surrounded by great people that just don't know, or they weren't taught right. You know, they weren't raised that way. And so for us to be on this platform, I take advantage of it. I have a voice and I do my best to educate. That's all I can do. But yes, my coaches were amazing, very supportive. A lot of families some were quiet, and I try not to judge, you know, it's hard. So, you know, you learn a lot around this time for sure.
Yeah. Charita, how do you work with or try to educate those coaches that either can't see past the blind spot of white privilege or don't think that they have any biases? How do you get them to understand what's going on in the world right now? How do you get them to understand a little bit better?
Anyone who really knows me knows that I am very strong-willed and probably many would say opinionated, and that's okay. But I don't bite my tongue on much. So I am more than happy to speak to people where they are. For me, everything is relational. And I believe the more we know each other, the more you'll understand my story. The more that I understand you, I'll understand your story. as a result, we'll realize that our stories are very similar. I mean, we've gone through a lot of the same things, and what I don't know, I'm going to ask questions. So I know I get on a lot of people's nerves because I'll ask questions. Typically, they come out as if I'm judging. I'm really not. My brain is just always going. So I've learned over the years to be forthcoming with my ignorance, because there's a lot of things I don't know. Growing up in the inner city, there was a way we lived, there was a way we looked at people, and I'll be honest, the white people were the devil. That's how things were. And I knew once I got to college, that wasn't the way that I should think. I understand now kind of what was being said, but it was said in such a negative way that I had to take a step back. And so my years in college, I was really quiet in terms of voicing where I came from and how I lived and how I didn't have A, B, and C, because I was evaluating and looking at other people. So I saw married couples. I saw a dad in the house. I saw parents come and give money to their kids. I'm like, whoa, that happens? I saw parents sending goodie bags and things like that to their children. And I'm just like, wow, how is that happening? So my level of not understanding and curiosity led me on the complete opposite side of things. And I'm just honest and straightforward. There's times where I could be Cleveland in a heartbeat. And there's also times where I have to realize that I'm a new creature and that I need to be able to, once again, meet people where they are. So one of the things that we do, and I'm going to share this with y'all, and I would encourage you to do it with your team. It's I have a young lady come in the 2021 class, and I reached out to all of the parents because I don't really know that group. I don't really know the 2020s as intimately as I know the kids that are in our program already. So I said the best way that I'm going to get to know them is to kind of know their parents. So I'll scroll through social media and see what they felt about the issues that took place. Were they for, were they against, were they neutral? It didn't matter where they stood, but it gave me an end to be able to talk about it. And so I spoke to one mom, and she told me about the narrative 4 story exchange. And I said, okay, talk to me about it. And so she shared with me, I'm going to write my story. And this is where you create your team and build your culture and be as vulnerable as I can. So in my story, I would say my dad was killed when I was 10. My mom was a drug addict. I've been abused. All of these different things I'm going to put in my letter. And it's written, I. I then give that letter to Terri. Meanwhile, Terri has written her letter. This is what I experienced. Single mom. Mom was paying through club. I mean, when I was in college, I was exposed, not exposed. And I read Terri's letter as if Terri's story was my story. Terri's going to read my letter as if it were her story. Now, we don't get the letters in advance. So I write it, I give it to Terri. Terri reads it out loud to the team. And so now, as a result of that, we've created a bond because as human beings, it is a heart issue. So now that I'm telling her and she's reading, oh, wow, I didn't know that, Rita. I didn't know that. And it's not an effort to feel sorry for anyone, because that's one of the things that we don't want. Don't feel sorry for me. The life that I have is because that's what God gave me to live. Now it is my job to share that with someone else. So as Terri reads my letter, she may become emotional, and I'm going to let her become emotional if that's how she feels. I'm not going to say, oh, it's okay. But it now creates a bond between Terri and I. It creates a bond with the team, and we circulate it around the team. Does that make sense? And so now we grow closer. So now I may put in there some things like, well, I don't like being called this, or I don't like when people say I have potential, because we all know what that meant. Or the athletic girl over there, we know what that meant as well. So if I don't like these things, I've encouraged the team to write this in your letter. If I grew up and I don't like the color red, then I'm going to work hard because I care about you. I love red, by the way, I'm a Delta. But I'm going to encourage you not to wear it as well. So we then grow. And this is something that takes place throughout the season. It doesn't just happen one day. And so what I do after every time I speak, after everything I learn, I text all of our players. This is what I did today. This is what I learned. What do you think about this? How would you like it to look differently? And so I engage them in conversation. So I feel like we grow together, and then we start breaking down the barriers. I know for a fact everyone wants to know about our hair. So I've personally taken my extra hair out on purpose because now it's going to open the door for someone to ask a question. Don't touch it, but you can ask a question. You know, and because truth be told, I got questions too. There's a lot of things I want to know about the straight hair, you know, and so now I have your curiosity, you have my curiosity, we start bonding.
Ray, I'm really sorry about that hair remark, by the way. Sorry, man.
That's fine. There's not much there.
Ray, I can give you some, don't worry.
So, Charita, you brought up something that's really interesting, though. You talked about how you growing up in Cleveland, that you did have this idea of white people that was very negative, and I'm going to ask the panel if you all had the same feelings at some point growing up or some point in your life. How did you get past it? How in other words, I want you to mirror how we should maybe talk to people that we know that are on the racist side and say, hey, this is what you can do to get through it or get past it. Anybody want to tackle that one? Go ahead, Penny.
See, it was some key white people that helped change my life. So that showed me my potential. I shouldn't have used that word. That showed me my purpose. And so I can't necessarily say I felt a certain way toward white people. It was times like when I was growing up, when Roots came on, I get mad. Planet of the Apes, and then I would hear a side conversation and they would call people of color that. It's those type, it wasn't anything directed toward, like right at me, it was always indirected. But so I want to make that clear. But one thing I would like to say, if you want to see change, if you are allowing a private conversation to happen that you would be embarrassed if we all heard it publicly, that's where you start to change. Because the conversations that Rita's talking about is when you grow up in your house and, you know, when something happened, the first thing you might, were they white or were they black? Because black people don't do that, you know, stuff like that. So the question is, but the conversations that we grow up listening to or allowing, that's how racism is taught. So I tell my girls and my team, I coach at an HBCU, but if you look at my team, we're very diverse because I believe that I want my team to reflect our world. So I have white and blacks on my team. And I think it's very important that that happens. So for me, I can't say that I grew up hearing horrible conversations toward white people. I believe I was indirectly affected because of how I was treated, because of the color of my skin, not because in my household I heard bad conversations. That's for me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, my grandpa was a Black Panther. So we were raised very early on about understanding genocide against our people. I learned the Negro national anthem before I learned our national anthem as a country. And it's not necessarily fear or villainization of white people. It's discomfort or not sure what their actual motives would be, which is what I was raised with. But ultimately, my dad is a preacher. So in that, teaching like love and understanding and just hoping that the good you put into the world will be the good that you receive. So it's just breaking down that barrier, because it's, when you look at it, it's two sides of the coin, right? I'm like, am I distrustful or am I loving? Like, which one is it today? But ultimately, it's just embracing both, understanding we have a different culture that people don't understand and is, again, systemically like looked down upon in this country to some degree or marginalized in whatever sense. It's just opening yourself up to have the conversations or opening yourself up to have different experiences. I'm sure when we all experienced club to some capacity, it was a new way that we weren't aware of, like those team dinners where you sit down and one parent pays for everyone. It blew my mind. I was like, y'all are just buying my dinner? Like, it works that way? I was so confused. Like, it's things that we don't necessarily agree with. When you're going on recruiting trips and you're just like, this team's predominantly white, they do some weird things that I'm not really a fan of, whereas this team has like 2 to 3 Black people or people of color that I feel a little bit more comfortable with. It's like recognizing you're not always going to be in that like safe space, but it's good for you to grow and learn someone else's culture, because just because we're experiencing different cultures doesn't mean that we have different ideologies. It just means we're experiencing different things. So I just try to do the same thing. Like, I put good into the world and look to receive good back. And if I'm not, then it's a conversation of respecting my space and understanding what I'm looking to take in and hopefully what you would like to take from it. So that's how I deal with it in like the upbringing that I had.
Yeah. Ray, what about you? Have you had those thoughts before, or those ideas?
Well, I was raised in a very diverse family because I'm actually Hispanic as well. And so all my cousins were white and Hispanic. And so my mom was very averse to Caucasians and would say a lot of things in the household, kind of like, you've got to be careful, you've got to watch this, so on and so forth, because of her experience. You know, she was the only one out of 9 kids that married an African-American man. And so, you know, a lot of my uncles and aunts, they did not treat my dad very well when they first got married, and there was a lot of racism that we experienced within our own family. And with recent events, I've actually been exposed to a lot of my uncles, who I just saw as my uncles. I didn't think of my white uncles, but they were my uncles. But they're very much, you know, anti-Black Lives Matter, and they're posting a lot of things that are not in support of the movement. And so it's kind of been a constant evolving for me. And I'd say, like, I never really paid a ton of attention until I got older and until I got into volleyball, and I noticed that, hey, I'm always the only one. You know, I tend to always be the only Black guy. And in coaching now, it's a similar experience. At my current institution, my AD's been awesome because we've had a lot of great conversations. But he said, like, I realize that I am a white male and I don't understand your experience. And so I want to learn from you. So I think a lot of it is education. And, you know, I try not to judge people by their skin tone, by their sexuality, by any things like that. I just try to figure out who they are, you know, who they are at the core, what kind of person they are, and then I try to learn from them.
Can I say something? I'm so sorry.
No, sure.
About what Ray said with his AD. It's important when administrators give you a voice, or even if your like allied head coaches, assistant coaches say something for you as well. Like one of my really good friends who's a coach in the Ivy Leagues sat there and noticed that the people making decisions on what's going to roll out in regards to the movement were all white or people that weren't marginalized. So he sat there and brought it up to one of his like associate ADs and was like, hey, I'd love it if we can get people of color on this panel. I don't have to be involved, but there are XYZ assistant coaches that should be in on this conversation. And as a white man, like that's saying something. It's giving those people a space to be a part of the conversations. And when your administration helps you out in that sense, it gives you a whole nother level of power and influence to push forward the positive things and like give people the conversations that are needed, or like give them a space to have the conversations.
Well, and I think for him, a lot of it was just awareness. One of the things I brought up to him is I said, you know, I appreciate all the emails and the messages and the Twitter, you know, posts. And I said, but everything's coming from a white male. I said, it'd be nice to hear the perspective of a minority. And on, you know, Benedictine, we have 2 campuses, one's a D3, one's an NAIA. Between all the 36 teams on our 2 campuses, there's only 2 of us that are African American as coaches. And so that was a conversation we divulged to him as well. Like, you have to start to understand our perspective. You got to start to ensure that, you know, whoever's the most qualified coach should be hired. But out of 36 programs and all the coaches, heads, and assistants, 2 African American coaches seems like a really small number. You know, so I think it did open the door to have a lot of tough, uncomfortable conversations with our administration and say, we've got to make sure that we're representing our student body. We're primarily Latino and African American on our campus, yet our coaching staff does not reflect that by any means.
Terri, being a biracial female growing up, did you have those issues as well? You were struggled with white people, and then maybe struggled with Black. Were you caught in the middle at all, or no?
Oh, I was definitely caught in the middle a lot. Well, first off, my mother's, you know, white, and my dad wasn't involved in my life, my upbringing. But I will tell you, my mother went above and beyond to make sure that I was very much aware and in tune of everything about my background. And for my mom, you know, she had my oldest sister at a younger age with my father, and was forced to give up my oldest sister for adoption, and eventually married my father, and then had my oldest brother, sister, and I, and married and everything. But bottom line, it was never accepted. So my mom always you know, she always struggled being a white person with, you know, little mixed kids running around, and was called everything under the sun. And, you know, heaven forbid if I came home and the first time I asked my mom what mulatto was because someone called me mulatto, she grabbed me by the arm, took me down to the school, checked the person, make sure you educate people on what mulatto is. And ironically, years later, I coached a girl, and I made a comment that we were both biracial, and she goes, "Oh, you're mulatto also?" And I kind of looked at her sideways, and I'm like, "Who taught you that?" And, you know, a lot of people don't realize mulatto is just as bad as the N-word. And so you do not refer to that. And again, just another opportunity to educate people, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that do have biracial children that don't quite know and have not, you know, done their research or educated themselves or taught their children as well as my mom did. And so I feel sometimes I have to do that. But absolutely, dating was hard, everything that could possibly happen. And I made that comment, you know, it's completely different, you know, and there's a lot of things that happened growing up in life that were hard. But I feel like it was just an opportunity for me to be a stronger woman. And, you know, and it's just, I still see things to this day, and it's frustrating, it's difficult, and, you know, it's a daily struggle, in my opinion, for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to ask everybody this, but I'm going to start with Charita. There's no doubt in my mind that all of you at one point or another have had a racist epithet thrown at you, that you've had, you know, some sort of a really awful, you know, situation. And I guess my first question is how did you handle it, especially if you were with kids or with your teams? And then second of all, do you take it with you? Do you try to educate that person? Do you just realize it's a lost cause and walk away? How do you deal with that? Charita, I'll start with you.
I was driving down the street one day, and I had my daughter in the front seat, and I got pulled over. I wasn't speeding, you know, I'm like, why am I getting pulled over? And so I pull off to the side, police officer comes to my side, another police officer walks up to my daughter's side of the car. So immediately I become, why are you on the passenger side of the car? You know, if I did something, it's me. So the police officer is like, I need to see license and registration. I was like, okay, you know, can I get them out of the glove box? You know, because I got to ask that question. And I go to get it out, and he says yes. And I said, well, why did you pull me over? I wasn't speeding. He was like, well, I think your tag is expired on your car. So immediately I go, oh, is that all? You know, because in my head, I'm thinking, that's all. And then I was like, well, I work for the university. I'm, you know, it's a courtesy car, so I'm sure they're sending me my tags or what have you. And then the officer kind of looked at me as if, yeah, right, sure, you work for the university. And I said, but while we're kind of talking, why is there an officer on the passenger side? And he goes, do you feel uncomfortable? Absolutely, because there's no need to be on my daughter's side of the car. And so he encouraged the other officer to move away. And then I pulled out my business card and I showed it to him. And he was like, I'm so sorry. I said, you can call the dealership yourself and realize that the car is in my possession. So I knew, and it worked out fine, but I knew at that point in time that it was real, because, you know, anybody, I think, if we feel the cops behind us, you know, our heart beat a little bit fast, but my heart beats a lot faster because of everything that takes place in the world. And my husband is 6'5" and about 3 bills. And so I'm always a little alarmed because he has this disposition. His face just looks like he's intimidating. Now, he's a big teddy bear, but he looks some kind of way. So we're constantly talking about it. We're constantly dealing with it, to the point where I had to educate my son. I had to tell him, I said, hey, Junior, what would you do if the police pulled mommy over? And he was like, I don't know. And I was like, well, what would you do if they had daddy down on the ground with his hands behind his back? He goes, Mommy, I'm pretty sure I would just cry. And, you know, and that broke my heart. And so I had to educate him. Junior, you have to be quiet. You have to make sure that you keep your hands where you can be seen. I said, even then, you know, you're at the mercy of how someone's feeling, but you have to work hard not to provide energy to make the situation worse. And so for me, it's about educating our kids. And for me, and some people disagree with it, but I believe in putting them in environments where they can get the big picture. of life. I don't believe when we get to glory, we all gonna look like me. I believe when we get there, we're gonna all look a little bit different. So therefore, my son takes Mandarin. Therefore, we go to all black church. I'm gonna be honest, all black church, because I want that peace, because I'm not around a whole bunch of people that look like us. But I need to make sure he's protected and she is protected, because like Terri, where do they fit in? So he's going to be educated, and I don't want someone to just see him as someone who's tall and athletic and could be a basketball player. I don't want someone to look at her just because she's extra dark and think that she doesn't belong. So I have to, as a parent, educate my kids at this age and then show them that this is going to happen. We're real in our house. This is going to happen. This is what they're going to call you. This is what it means. But this is how you respond. And I think that if we as parents do that and then have the conversation. So I shared earlier with the panel, and I'll share it with everyone listening. I sent a letter to the resources to my kids' school, and I got an email back asking, what would I like to discuss? How would I like it handled? And can I come in and have a conversation? So for me, they go to all, it's a Christian school, so, you know, a lot of white people. So I am excited that that principal took the initiative, and all I did was say, here's some resources. I didn't really have an intent behind it, but knowing that they're open to it is exactly why I chose to put them in that type of school.
Yeah. Penny, what about
Rita,
you?
yes.
Oh,
I was
no,
just
go
gonna
ahead,
ask
Terri. Go ahead.
I understand, like, so just be honest. Why did you really tell the police officer that you worked for U of A? It might have been, you know, something with the car, or did you throw that out there just in case?
I threw it out there just in case, because at the end of the day, they probably thought I stole it because we live up in the foothills.
Yeah. But I mean, that's just reality of what happens when you get pulled over nowadays. I mean, you drop who you are or your background, so they put their guard down a little bit. So my boys just got pulled over today coming back from the gym with their friend's dad, and my husband and I were like, why'd you guys get pulled over? And they're like, he was going 3 miles over the speed limit. And we're like, did he get a ticket? And they're like, no, he just let him go. And but he had to name drop who he was or where they were coming from. And I mean, that was just today. So it's just sad to hear stuff like that. But I don't think people realize how often that happens. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Eric.
Oh, no. It's all good. It's all good.
One more tag on to what Charita said with her husband and his disposition, because very often so, like, people have resting faces, and my face is from New York, so it's very resting and mean, because like New Yorkers, you're just going about your business, you're moving, you're getting to where you need to get to, and it's like it's almost code switching when you know you're in a space where you have to make people feel safer, so you need to smile and be cheery and or seem as if like, hey, this is how I carry myself, please recognize this so you don't feel threatened by my person. And like in that same struggle with what Terri said with being pulled over for going 3 miles over the speed limit, it's just day-to-day things that are microaggressions against us or how we have to navigate ourselves through this world. And while it is sad, and like the fact that we have to keep talking about educating our youth and people that are trying to come from the same position as us or even further, it's heartbreaking. Like that's to the point that we want to get past that. Like I don't want to have to teach my son or daughter that they have to do this to make it through a police encounter. Like I don't want to have to teach them that this is what's going to happen when people feel threatened by you because you're big.
That's part of life, Amber. It's I mean, my daughter said it to me just yesterday, like, how come, you know, Justice isn't learning how to drive yet? And I'm like, I'm no rush for him to start driving. He knows not to wear a black hoodie. He knows to put his hands up on the steering wheel immediately. Those are things I started with him when he was 12. I mean, it's just part of life.
I mean, it's part of life in America. And like, while there are biases elsewhere in the world, we've all been overseas, like we know what it's like. It's never to the point of fear for your life. And I feel like that's the ultimate piece that I want to take away from that. Because yeah, like people view us a certain way, but we want what this movement is pushing right now is getting to a point where our humanity won't be questioned based off of nothing, except for the color of our skin and how big we are or how threatening we may seem. So like, that's what I mean to the point of like racism, in my opinion, is never going to be fully eradicated to the sense because it's opinionated. It's based off of like what your view is of certain people. It's like Germany, like they sit there and teach all of their kids, all of their people, this is what we did. This is why it can't happen again. Like this is how like nationalism or this feeds into something. Are there still German people that dislike Jewish people? Absolutely. Is it squashed or qualmed? Because people don't let that uprising or that hate into their general like interactions, yes. And I would love for us to be able to get to that point. Is it gonna happen today or tomorrow? Absolutely not. I.e., your son is getting pulled over today, unfortunately so. But is that something we should look forward to in the future if this is what this movement is creating with defunding police forces and putting it towards like the community aspect of like social workers, mental health workers? Yeah, I think it should be.
Yeah.
I think you start by educating. When you say educating, you change our history books to tell the truth. Now you talk about Juneteenth, you talk about our real history, so then they're educated. We don't have to take on that burden to really educate them. I want to tell you I'm sure this is a common situation we've all been in. You tell me, Ray, if I'm right. I'm at the United States Air Force Academy. That means my team is predominantly white. I walk up to the ticket counter. We're about to take a flight. I have a white male assistant. I have a white female athletic trainer. I walk up, they ask the other one, how can I help you, sir? Are you the head coach? Of course that's happened. No, I'm the head coach. That happens all the time. That is way far too common. It happens all the time. Presumptions. But that's just a typical situation that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I was driving in a 35 coming from the airport, picking up one of my white male assistant, just, I don't remember, recent though, before COVID. And a cop comes on the side of me, it's 5 o'clock traffic, he pulls me over. He tells me I'm going a 65 and a 45. And I know for sure I wasn't speeding because when I was on my way to the airport to pick up my assistant, I noticed cops everywhere. And our airport is over in a socially economic low area. So they were making their quota for the month. And so I was telling them, I said, I don't know what's going on. The cops are everywhere. Lo and behold, pull me on the side, gives me a ticket. First of all, I was in a Mercedes, a 300. He didn't think I probably should have been driving that. We go to court because I fight it. And I'm just telling the judge, there's no way I could have been explained. There's a car to the left of me, and he had to come from behind me, way on the other side. It wasn't until my white male assistant came out and testified that they threw it out. Happens all the time.
One of the things you guys all brought up, and I think it's rightfully so, and we've only got about 15 minutes to go here, so I want to be respectful of your time. The word education has popped up about 100 times in the last 75 minutes, and obviously that's part of why we're doing this webinar. It's part of why we've enlisted this amazing panel, and I want to maybe just go with each of you and talk about, first of all, how do we educate and what should we be educating to not only our kids, our assistant coaches, white coaches, other coaches of color. What do we need to educate in order to hopefully, like Amber said, start turning this around, start changing some minds a little bit? Ray, I'll start with you on that.
I think, it's just awareness is the first thing. I think understanding that there are going to be situations that are going to make us uncomfortable. There are things that you can say that are offensive to us, whether it's intentional or not. I think that's a big part of education. I know with my team, we have a lot of those life discussions like Terri mentioned, or Rita mentioned. So we talk about a lot of real things. When all of this happened, we had a Zoom call with my team and we had a lot of honest conversations. We talked a lot about perspective and how there are different perspectives outside their own. And so I think a lot of the education is just, we have to be vocal, and that's the thing is you have to be vocal, but I feel sometimes as a black man I have to toe the line because I don't want to be the angry black man. And I get that a lot because I'm outspoken and I'm really willing to step forward and speak when I have an issue with things. So it's educating people to say, first off, because I speak a certain way, because I react a certain way, you don't understand my upbringing. It's not because I'm black. And maybe I'm a little bit more defensive because I've had a lot of experience where, I've experienced racism, or I've been told, you shouldn't speak up in these situations. So now I have a platform where I feel like I can. So I think it's being vocal as a coach, and it's just educating, I think, our kids. As coaches, that's the first thing we can do is educating our kids. As directors, educating our coaches. making them aware. It happens all the time. I have an African-American mixed kid on my team right now, and we had that conversation this year because kids were constantly making jokes about him being mixed, him being light skinned, him being this, him being that, to the point where he brought it to me and said, Coach, I'm uncomfortable. And I don't hear those conversations. I'm not in the hotel room with them. I'm not eating the meals with them all the time. And so you just have to be willing to step up and educate and talk to your kids, talk to your coaches, let them know that that cannot be acceptable ever. It can't be the one time it was just a mistake, or, you know, he just wasn't thinking correctly. It can't be okay anymore.
Yeah. Charita?
I was actually taking a couple of notes there. I think part of it is by putting yourself in a position to engage with your team. I think getting them to put their phone down, talk about topics and issues that are going on in the world, getting to know their parents a little bit more, because I think that will allow you to know what you're dealing with. I know some people are afraid, you know, because parents start asking some questions they shouldn't be asking, but it allows you to understand the mindset in which they were raised. Because had someone taken the time to talk to my mama, they would have known why I was the way I was. Had someone taken time to get to know the things that I experienced, then it would have helped the process. So we can't do it by ourselves. And being in college, we have 4 years, and no one wants to wait until that last year to get to the end of it all. And then the other thing is get it involved in groups and organizations where you can talk and problem solve together. So the Minority Coaches Connection is a new organization that's being started by Dietrich Collins Parker, which will allow coaches to come together and talk about the issues. This is what's going on here. And it's not to bash anyone, it's not to place shame or blame any direction, but it's so that we can talk about the issues that are going on so we can take it back to our team to encourage them. Also, encourage them to get involved. I said it earlier, after this call, I'm sending out my text. This is what I did today. This is what we discussed. This is what's going on. What do you guys think? What do you think I should have said? Did I leave something out? This is what I learned. We have to communicate, because they're going to see what we do more than what we actually say. So I have to show you that I'm out and just be involved in it, as well as going out into the community, like I said, with the elementary, middle school, and wish the NCAA do something about their high school, but just putting ourselves in front of them to say it's okay, and be a mentor. I probably have too many mentees, but be a mentor, talk to people, let them know your experience, because I'm grateful for everything that I endured. As much as it wasn't fun necessarily, I'm grateful. Now I'm in a much better position to help others. That's education.
Penny, what about you?
I think it starts one conversation at a time. I think it's going to cause a snowball effect, but first a ripple effect, because if I have the tough conversation with my team and they begin to have conversations with their friends, and then their friends outside of the team, and then their parents, now it's starting to expand. So I think change comes by one conversation at a time.
Okay. Terri, what about you?
I mean, everything everyone just mentioned, it's constant communication, being vocal. These are awkward, uncomfortable conversations and with a lot of people. So for me, typically I have a tendency to bring things up and discuss it and make sure my kids know it's normal to talk about it, and be available. I'm always available for my kids. You know, I think I'm in a different position as a club coach. You know, as young women, or young men, they're coming to their coaches and asking for advice. It's a little bit different for me because I'm working with 12-year-olds, 13, and I'm not trying to parent, and I'm not trying to tell these parents how to raise their kids in any way, but I definitely think I'm put in a position where I need to be able to educate these young minds, because they're in a sport where there's always going to be minorities, whether it's an athlete or a coach or whatever. And so for me, just talking about it, making it a comfortable conversation.
And Amber?
I want to answer the question in 2 parts very quickly. I know we don't have that much time. But one, as like an assistant working in a space, and then 2, with your kids. As an assistant or as a head coach, if your administration or your head coach makes you feel uncomfortable, or you don't feel like it's a safe environment, I'm sure we've all been there at some point in time where they've said a couple things, laughed in jest, like they feel like it's okay to ask questions. I've had a small white woman ask me and say to a T, not to be racist, but why are Black women so insecure? And create this negative environment. Because I checked my skin really quick. I was like, well, I'm here, so I don't know if this is a direct jab or if this is just like a conversation you're willing to have, and openly had the conversation, yet they were unwilling to learn. Same white woman touched my hair and said, oh, it's soft. Oh, hair is hair. Hair is hair. Hair is going to be soft, whereas yours deals with other things, mine deals with other things. And say, no, Black people's hair is coarse. So she wasn't open to conversation. She wasn't open to change or understanding. And that in turn did not make a very conducive mental environment for myself in order for me to get my job done, or me to feel comfortable, or for me to grow. It got to a point where I was suggested to go to the arbiter of the university because of the environment that I was asked to work in. And at that point, you need to recognize as an assistant where you are going to grow instead of remain stagnant or feel reduced, and where you feel like you can continue to educate and make yourself not only known, but well-versed in this world of coaching. Like, you need to understand where your shortcomings are going to be either exploited or built upon, where you can learn and grow, continue to be like a helpful assistant, because that's your job. Your job is to assist. It's to get you to the next level. It's to push this team. It's to assist the head coach. And if you don't feel like you're able to do that, then find another space that's going to allow you. 2, as a coach, I'm really big on actionable steps. Like, as a unit at Seattle U, working under Michelle Cole, who's also a Black woman, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to do so, not only because she's Black, but because she's knowledgeable, and she allows me space to process and pursue things that I'm very dedicated to. But we sat down with our team, who's predominantly white, and we asked them, what is important to you in all of this? What does this movement mean to you? And we've had some uncomfortable kids who are from like upstate Washington or Oregon or places where these conversations aren't had. And then we've had others that are super vocal, very about the cause, very into activism right now. So we pinpointed 3 things as a unit, as a team, that were possible for us to impact. And that's educating ourselves on all levels of systemic racism so that we understand these microaggressions and can kick them in the butt when we see them. Like Penny said, those conversations that are had behind doors. 2, financially, highlighting businesses in our area in order for them to get not only views on our platform, but our money. We're going to be catering Black, hands down. If we're traveling, if we're home, we're going to be catering Black. And it's finding that option. 3, it's heading into those marginalized communities, whether it be through tutoring, whether it be through volleyball, in some way, shape, or form. We are going to get those kids on this campus and show them what higher learning or higher education is about and how sports can affect it in a positive way. So it's about doing the next piece of work in order for all this to come to fruition, because education is great. And then you add education to action and you're unstoppable. That's when you get the snowball effect.
Yeah. You actually just stole my thunder, because that's literally the last question I was going to ask everybody was, we've got about 25 coaches online with us, and this video will go, it's going to go on YouTube so other people will watch it. But what are some actionable steps, maybe 1, 2, 3, Amber threw 3 out there, that coaches can do like tomorrow, like next week, next month, that can start turning this around a little bit? And I'll start with Penny, and we'll go around the horn here. So Penny, go ahead.
I would say, first of all, at the collegiate level, I think the first thing they need to do is get all their kids registered to vote, because we have 3 levels of government. The first thing you want to do is make change. Then we need to start making change at the lowest level. And then don't just wait for November for the presidential. We got to do it at the judicial level and at the legislative level, not just the executive. But the first thing I would do is educate them on getting themselves in a position where they're capable, knowledgeable, and be a registered voter.
That's great. Charita?
I would say on the same line as Penny, making sure that they understand why they're voting. We had a meeting today with our student athletes, and 3 of the student athletes actually said they just voted the way their parents told them to vote, which means that they're not educated on it. They want to understand the process. So that's super important for them to understand why they're voting the way they're voting, as well as having their voice. They actually have more power than they think. They have more authority, and they are in a position to make a difference. So inspiring them to use their voice.
Okay. Terri?
I just think people need to be educated on diversity. If you look at the education that our kids are learning, or what our kids are learning in school right now, very rarely is slavery or anything brought up in school anymore. It's mostly Holocaust, and which is very important to learn as well. But most schools are not teaching about the history of African Americans and slavery, and a lot of people don't understand the background of that. And so I think it's so important to have those conversations, because they're not learning at school, they're not understanding this movement right now. And so for the coaches that are in a position to coach anyone and everyone, things have to be discussed, and I think it's normal, and I think it's necessary. If there's one African American, even if there's no African Americans, this has to come up in conversation. We have to be aware of our surroundings. We have to be aware of the things that we say or do, you know, down to you know, hotel room situation with one minority in the room, and the girls, can I brush your hair, can I feel your hair? Just all of that stuff needs to be discussed. You know, everyone needs to be educated. And it does start with the coaching, because these kids look to us as coaches for advice, to be a mentor, all of the above. So it's just so important that we open that door and make the conversation available for these kids. And as coaches, we need to be knowledgeable, for sure.
Okay. And Ray, I'll give you the last word.
So I know on our campus, I reached out to my athletic director. I actually run the SAC, the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So we're actually starting a diversity and inclusion committee on our campus to raise awareness, to have these discussions, to ensure that we are educating both ourselves and other members of the campus, because I think education is invaluable, but we have to actually educate with real information. Penny mentioned that earlier, not just the stuff that's in the history books, that's the condensed version, the reality of what's going on, the reality of our story. And so I think that's a big action step, is looking at, you know, are you being inclusive? Is there diversity? And what are you doing to educate your kids as coaches, but also yourself?
I want to thank the 25 or so coaches that joined us today. Obviously, they're taking a first step by spending 90 minutes with us tonight. I can't thank this panel enough. Rita, Penny, Amber, Terry, and Ray, you guys were amazing. It's not always easy to open up your minds and your hearts and your souls for everybody else to take a look at. And you guys did that tonight. And I really, really appreciate it. The Arizona region appreciates it. And hopefully some good things will come from this. So thank you guys very much. And
thank you, Eric, for allowing us to have this platform.
Thank you, Eric.
My honor. I promise
Thanks,
you it's my honor.
And
All right.
to the 25 coaches out there, if you guys have questions, I'm available for, you know, if you have any questions whatsoever. Our emails are online, all of us, right? So feel free to reach out and ask. And it starts with conversation, for sure.
One at a time.
Absolutely. So if you need to get a hold of me, outreach at azregionvolleyball.org. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again tonight, and enjoy your evenings, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.